Oh, see how great is our God. You know, if you don't know what prayer to make in your life sometimes, that's enough. Just to affirm, how great is my God. There's no mess you and I can make that you and God can't clean up together. Today we're talking about the 23rd Psalm. I've been looking at it metaphysically from some words that came from my Bible teacher when I was in seminary and for him from his Bible teacher before. The 23rd Psalm is a gorgeous piece of literature. It embraces our heart and makes us feel so comforted and loved, and in and of itself is beautiful. When we look at it metaphysically, though, we try to see another layer of meaning, and I believe there is one. My Bible teacher said that we should look at the word Lord in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible, with all caps, L-O-R-D, as meaning the same thing for them as law. That the law, because for Hebrew people in those days, really, and in some sects today, really, God is all about the laws. There's 600-700 rules we have to live by, and it's about keeping all the laws. Now, that may sound negative, but if you look at this and you look at laws as spiritual laws, it's a whole different thing. So we've been looking, instead of the Lord is my shepherd, we looked as the law is my shepherd. The law being the spiritual rules of life that guide me and keep me going in the straight. It's a whole nother way to look at it, and I believe it's really powerful. We're on the 4th verse today, which is, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. That walking through the valley of the shadow of death, it's the one thing that us human beings think is like the ultimate bad thing that can happen. And it's so fascinating because almost in every religion outside of Christianity, it's really and truly emphasized that life doesn't end with this experience. Science tells us that life is a form of energy, and a form of energy can never be lost. It can only be transformed and changed into different forms. And if we could just know that, it would change the way we live. It would change our understanding to know that we are not just human beings striving to have a spiritual experience, but that we are truly spiritual beings. There is a part of us, a soul, a consciousness with a capital S, that is forever and everlasting. In the Hindu tradition of the Katha Upanishad, it says, having realized the self, and that self has a capital S. That means having realized who you really are. Not a body, not flesh and blood, but realizing who you are. That which is without beginning and end, and beyond the great and unchanging, one is freed from the jaws of death. See, if we could just really know who we are, honestly, as spiritual beings and entities, we would be freed from that. The Apostle Paul said that by embracing death, and he's talking about Jesus now, taking it into himself, he destroyed the devil's hold on death and freed all who cower through life, scared to death of death. In fact, for me, that is the really great message of Easter. It's not a message that says we were so awful, something had to be sacrificed. It is a message that Jesus was giving to us and said, hey, folks, death is not real. You are truly spiritual beings. And just to prove it, go ahead, kill me. I'm coming back. The original Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'll be back. And he was there and said, I am back. And they saw him and they said, wow, death isn't real. What's happened in Christianity is it's pretty much like that's a Jesus thing and the rest of us can't, but it's not true. Jesus came to tell us that every single one of us is a spiritual being, and this whole experience. So that's why the psalm is so powerful. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I don't have to fear anything. Because the law tells me, spiritual truth tells me that I am an unending being of light and love. Absolutely unending. I may take off this particular shape and form, but I'll be back. The other part of this verse says, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. So I have my rod right here. The staff was the little thing with the crook on the end of it, the shepherd's crook. And that's because, I'm not bad-mouthing sheep or anything, but they're not particularly bright animals. They really are mostly concerned with eating what's right in front of them between their two front feet. So they kind of walk along, always just eating, and they can walk off the edge of a cliff. So the shepherd had this crook on the end that he could yank them by the neck and say, come over here. Come over here and do this. I have to do that with my robot vacuum cleaner sometimes. If it starts heading towards all the electrical wires, I say, no, come over here, get away from that. We all need that little kind of guidance. The rod, however, the rod that the shepherd had was for defense. Defense of all those things that would attack the herd, primarily wolves or any other kind of animals. That's what the rod was for. It was like an original karate thing. Now, what does that mean for us? That the law is our rod and staff. The law is that thing that's going to protect us. And what does it protect? How does it protect us? It protects us by telling us the truth of who we are. If you believe that you are a beloved child of God, and then someone comes up to there and says, oh, well, you can't do that because you're a woman. Boom! Or you have the rod. Or you can't do that because you're too old. Susan, you can't jump out of an airplane on your whatever birthday that's coming up. You can't. Boom! We have the rod of truth of who we truly are. And it protects us from all of the stuff that happens in the world, all of the fearful things. Oh, my God, the government is shut down. Who cares? The government is shut. There's another war coming. We have the rod of the truth of the peace of God that is in us at all times. The rod that says we know who we are. We are children of God, and I'm not going to be afraid of all that stuff. I can walk through the valley of the shadow of death, but I have the rod of truth. You see that? That's really powerful. Now, here's what's really cool about that is I have it. Okay? You say, well, yeah, you have it. Yeah. But a lot of people read that psalm and think that God has it. It's in God's place. And please, God, use your rod to protect me. We have it. We have it in the knowing of our own mind, so we can protect from that place of knowing and truth. It's not so much a God thing anymore. God has set these laws into motion and set these truths for us to believe and to hold on to, but they are ours and we use them. That makes sense? You're not scared, right? The 8 o'clock people were really scared I was going to bash them on the head. Charles Fillmore, who is the co-founder of Unity, said that the rod metaphysically is the power of the I am in spiritual consciousness. It is I am mastery in divinity. That I amness is the power of us knowing our divine connection with God. It's that presence that we know is in us. What Paul called it, the consciousness of the Christ. That is the I am, and that is the power of the rod. The last verse says that thou preparest a table before me, the next to the last verse, in the presence of mine enemies, thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. It's like, here's this big thing, but it's in the presence of my enemies. So what's that about? What kind of spiritual law could we think about for the enemies? Think of anything that maybe Jesus said about enemies? What? Love them? Really? Yes. Jesus actually said, I'm telling you to love your enemies. Let them bring out the best in you, not the worst. This is what God does. Now, here's the scene that's so powerful and so beautiful about this psalm. Here's this table being prepared with my enemies, people that I might necessarily want to use my rod against. But Jesus says, no, love them. Invite them to the table with you. And let them bring out the God part of yourself, that higher part of you that loves in the face of everything that looks like it's unloving. Let that sit at the table, because that's the only place that healing is going to happen. You understand? If I were to beat you off with the rod of truth, you would forever be an enemy. But if I invite you to the table as my enemy, and I love you, I listen, we can heal. And that's what this is all about. Healing being to knowing our oneness with God and each other. The last part of this verse, Charles Fillmore says the anointing is a symbolic expression of the pouring of the Spirit of love for one who has faith in God. So that last part is the anointest my head with oil. When we sit at that table and we are being loved and we're allowing that God presence to come to us, there is an anointing. There is a spirit of love that's flowing through us into that moment. And you'll feel that. Nothing feels better than loving, folks. I want you to know that. Do you know that? How great it feels to love. How great it feels to love people that don't necessarily haven't earned it. I love what Bishop John Shelby Spong says. We should love wastefully because we are tapped into a never-ending anointing of love that's flowing through us. So we should just be giving it out right and left. We don't care. You don't look like you get it, but I'm going to give you love anyway. And that's what we should be doing. The last verse says, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the law forever. Now, that's a little different. But it's about the goodness and the mercy that's overflowing in us all the time. Jesus said in the Gospel of Luke, give and it shall be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down and shaken together and running over. So we're sitting at this table, we're having this experience of life, and the promise is that when we give it out, when we give out love, when we give out our time, we give out our treasure, when we give out those things, they come back, pressed down, shaken up, and overflowing. Because that's the spiritual law. What you give, you receive, but even more in return. That's why if we look at this psalm as being a law, as being a way we can live our life, it's about how we can live with generosity. It's about how we can live with love. It's about how we can live without fear. All because of the spiritual truths that we know to be true. I'm going to invite you to close your eyes for just a moment with me. And I want you to understand that the opening of our minds and our consciousness, those doors that open ourselves to those wonderful experiences of God, all have a knob on the inside. And it's up to us to turn it and to open the door. So in these upcoming quiet moments, I'm going to invite you to imagine that you are putting your hand on the knob. You don't necessarily have to know what's on the other side, but you're just ready to be open. And when you are, you allow yourself to open that door and experience the oneness, the love, the power of this presence that we call God in you. Do this if you can in these quiet moments as we all come together in the sacred and holy silence.